in crafting a successful bipartisan strategy to confront and contain Russia is that how folks view our relationship with Russia really is determined by how they view President Trump. There's millions of Americans who increasingly, according to recent polls, don't think that Putin or Putin's Russia are a real threat to the United States, and they tend to be Trump supporters. And there's an all-time high number of Democrats who seem to think that Putin and Putin's Russia are a great threat to the United States. In fact, I'm here at the historic Chautauqua Institution in upstate New York to deliver a speech on exactly that topic today. Given how unprecedented this is, given the threat to the rule of law presented by this closed-door meeting between Trump and Putin, how do we move forward in a way that rebuilds a bipartisan approach to Russia that's clear-eyed and hopefully someday effective?
So, Senator, what is the end game here, do you think? Beyond being pals with Putin, and President Trump has talked a lot about wanting a personal relationship, warm relationship with him. What is the president's end game here?
Well, we don't yet know. And to be hopeful, if you look at his whiplash performances at the G7 and more recently at the NATO summit, one of the challenges with our president is that he tends to come into big meetings full of bluster and an approach that is in one direction, and within a matter of 24 or 48 hours, he's leaving, characterizing a relationship in a different direction. Given the warmth and optimism with which he's approached Vladimir Putin, incorrectly given his actions, one can remain hopeful that somehow not much comes out of this summit, and that, if anything, it is merely the reestablishment of a relationship between the United States and Russia where very few commitments are made. But, you know, frankly, in some ways, Putin has already succeeded by being at the same table, at the same level on the world stage as the President of the United States. He was thrown out of the G8 by President Obama. He's the subject of sanctions led by the United States, by most of the Western world. For Vladimir Putin to begin to re-enter global leadership is the beginning, I'm afraid, of his exit of the box he was put in for invading Crimea. The end game, I'm afraid, is one in which the United States is weakened by our president not having a clear-eyed approach to the very real threat that Russia poses to our alliances and our democracy.
All right, Senator Chris Coons, we appreciate you taking time away from your duties in Chautauqua to talk with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alice.
All right, our breaking news coverage of the Trump-Putin summit continues right now.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is your new day. It is Monday, July 16th. You see your team there, Allison and John in New York. I'm Chris Cuomo here in Helsinki, Finland, where they would say, Hyvää huomenta, good morning to you. Right now, President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are meeting one-on-one. First question to ask this morning is, why? President Trump wanted it that way, we are told, and why he wanted it that way included not being interrupted by his more hardline advisors when talking to Vladimir Putin. So they're behind closed doors, each has a translator, and that's it. So we won't know what was said until we hear the reckonings of both men. Now, before the meeting started, there was a little bit of a press avail, as we call it. President Trump spoke second and brought up a list of topics he wanted to discuss. No mention of the following. No mention of Syria, which was surprising, Crimea, Ukraine, the Russian election, the American election, rather. Take a listen.
Most importantly, we have a lot of good things to talk about and things to talk about. We have discussions on everything from trade to military to missiles to nuclear to China. We'll be talking a little bit about China. Our mutual friend, President Xi.
Mutual friend President Xi, not democratically elected, not by American standards. So what are these talks about? They take place just days after a big moment in the Russia probe in the U.S. 12 Russian military intelligence officers with the same unit that is suspected of doing the poisoning on UK soil of a former spy, indicted by special counsel Bob Mueller for hacking emails of Hillary Clinton's campaign and the DNC. We learned they penetrated America's election infrastructure as well, but there was no finding that they altered any vote counts. Earlier on Twitter, President Trump called out the United States as being to blame for strained relations with Russia. That is something that we have never heard a U.S. president do before. So why would he do that? What does it mean heading into this meeting, and how are they hoping to come out of it with wins? Let's begin our coverage with CNN's Caitlin Collins. What do we know, Caitlin?
Well, Chris, you saw there we heard from President Trump and President Putin that President Putin went first. He spoke first about what this meeting was going to look like, and then President Trump went after him. We're learning that that's because Russia is considered the host country of this summit between the two world leaders, their first formal sit-down since President Trump took office. Now, of course, they are behind closed doors, and the question on everyone's mind is what they are going to talk about while they're in there. As you noted, the president brought up China, nuclear weapons, missiles, trade. He did not bring up Ukraine, Syria, or election meddling, but this is how he said he believed those talks were going to go.
I think we have great opportunities together as two countries that, frankly, we have not been getting along very well for the last number of years. I've been here not too long, but it's getting close to 2 years. But I think we will end up having an extraordinary relationship. I hope so. I've been saying, and I'm sure you've heard over the years, and as I campaigned, that getting along with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Now, Chris, the president said what we're learning from sources is the president had 3 reasons for wanting to meet with Putin one-on-one, which he is doing right now. One of those is that he felt he could better assess Putin if they were sitting in a room with just the two of them and translators off to the side. Secondly, he didn't want any of their conversation to leak to reporters, something that has infuriated the president in the past. And lastly, the president didn't want any of his aides who take a strong stance on Russia to undercut or interrupt him during that sit-down with Vladimir Putin, which, according to the schedule before they were running late, was slated to run about 90 minutes. We'll see how long it goes, Chris.
All right, well, Caitlin, make sure to disappoint the president as quickly as possible and find out what's happening in that room. We need to know. All right, let's get some perspective. We have CNN senior White House correspondent Jeff Zeleny with us here, CNN senior political analyst David Gergen, and CNN global affairs analyst Susan Glasser. So, quick note that we understand that while the two presidents are in the room, there are other meetings going at the same time. We had been told there would be a joint lunch and working meeting after this, but now we're understanding that simultaneous to it, Secretary of State Pompeo, Foreign Minister Lavrov meeting contemporaneously at the same time. So that is a little bit more of what was being hoped for here, is that there would be some lower level discussions of people who could get into more of the true grist for the mill of these controversies that weren't mentioned by Trump in that little precursor meeting there. Now, we have to set the table with how we got here. Vladimir Putin has to feel good, Jeff Zeleny, or you could never tell by his countenance. You know, he looks like this was all but a bother for him. But President Trump has been saying all the things that he would want to hear, okay? European Union is a foe. Drama with NATO, drama with Theresa May, that the hacking is a witch hunt, that the reason U.S. Relations with Russia are bad is because of the United States. And then a tweet this morning that I want to put up for the audience. That's his tweet. Never worse, thanks to many years of U.S. foolishness and stupidity. Look at this, Jeff Zeleny. What do you make of that response from Russia?
And that is the Russian Foreign Ministry's account responding to that. And that is where the conversation begins. That is perfect context. Those 2 words, we agree. Boy, that gives President Trump so much there. It's extraordinary. It is being attacked by some Republicans saying that he should have started out. Ben Sass, Republican of Nebraska, was giving some advice on Twitter. Of course, he's not the biggest fan of the president. He said the president should have said this: Russia is the enemy of America and our allies, and we will expose and respond to confirmed cyber attacks. Of course, the president's not going to do that starting out a thing. But that tweet this morning may not have been the ideal way to start the conversation in some respects. I think separately of that, though, I'm being told by reporters in the room the president didn't bring up election meddling, but he was asked about it right afterward. He did not answer. But according to the AP reporter in the room, he said that Vladimir Putin was smirking when he was being asked those questions. So we'll see if that's true later on here. We do know that he's going to bring it up, but bringing it up is really beside the point.
Right.
Because the last time they met was last fall in Vietnam. Right. He said, I believe him when he says they didn't meddle.
Right. But
so
you know
much has changed
look,
since then.
But look, very often the approach is suggestive of the outcome. If I ask you, whether or not you meddled or hijacked the election or, hacked the election. That's one thing. I'm expecting you to deny it. This isn't a situation where it's open to doubt. And that's why they were making the point about whether or not, Susan, that Trump was going to drop the hammer on Putin about what he did, and nobody expects that now.
Well, that's exactly right. A lot of the build-up to this summit, right, we've been talking endlessly as if it was going to be some, debate between Trump and Putin. Obviously, that's not going to be the case when you just think about the president's presentation beforehand and his desire to have a friendly relationship. But, who cares whether they, get in a verbal sparring match? That's not really the issue. It's been 2 years since the 2016 election, and the question of what America's policy response is, both on the level of what we're doing inside the United States, but also in terms of how we're engaging with Russia. I want to underscore again how extraordinary this summit meeting is, like any other. First of all, you have the White House and the State Department trying to deny that it's even a summit meeting, at the same time that the President of the United States is tweeting in all capitals, it's a summit meeting. You have a president who has gone into a one-on-one meeting at his own request with Vladimir Putin, at least in part, because he doesn't trust or isn't willing to have his advisors there potentially to undercut him because they don't agree with his reconciliatory policy toward Russia. And then you have the details of the summit being so extraordinarily unclear, even going into the meeting. The schedule itself is in flux. We don't know who's going to be in there. The president has disregarded professional advice.
Right, but it's a little reflective of very simple reality, David Gergen. I'll bounce it to you on this. This is all Trump wanted. We're all here. Right. There's a big moment. He shook Putin's hand. He says, we're going to be good. We're going to talk. It's better than not talking.
And Donald Trump is at the center of the universe. Listen, I think what's shaping up is that Trump went into this meeting today under intense pressure to hold Putin accountable. And we've been looking for ways, is he going to do that? The tweet that he sent out sort of blaming the United States instead of Trump automatically tilted the argument to say it's all our fault. And then when you go through the litany of what he wants to talk about at the meeting, it has nothing to do with the past bad behavior of the Russians, nothing about holding them accountable. Instead of, let's look at the opportunities out there in the future on trade, on nuclear, on arms control, and on China. And it's sort of like he just wants to sweep the past into the past.
It gets tricky, though, right? Because what you ignore, you empower. And his own guy at the DNI, Dan Coates, said the red light is flashing, that they are trying to meddle once again right now, Russia, in the U.S. election.
It is not only, does he give Putin a free pass, but it insults our intelligence agencies. It insults our whole justice system. We're spending a lot of time and effort trying to figure out what the hell happened. There have been 32 people indicted so far. This is not something that just goes away easily when you know it's traced now directly to the Kremlin.
And look, we're all learning how to figure out what's going to happen here by a new set of expectations with Donald Trump. He is certainly unorthodox, unconventional, and any other word you can come up with when it comes to being president. And Zeleny, we saw it again today. He made a lot of hay during the campaign. Nobody knows this better than you by saying, I'll tell you how I'm different than Obama. This guy wasn't proud to be president. He bad-mouthed America all around the world. Well, the apology tour is over. In all fairness, did Obama ever say anything that approaches what Trump tweeted, giving the U.S. blame for Russia-U.S. bad relations?
Not that I recall, and I'm pretty sure that we would remember that, because that would have been an extraordinary moment, particularly being on foreign soil. I mean, that old adage is out the window, I guess, to not. But the president blaming the U.S. essentially, it's an extraordinary way to start this. And I'm not sure if he was tweeting. Often he's sort of telling his advisors what to tweet. That was coming as he was waiting for Vladimir Putin, who was arriving about an hour late. So, he has time on his hands to do that. But I think one thing here is clear. We've talked a lot about how President Trump doesn't prepare as much for these summits. I'm not sure that he doesn't prepare in the kind of way that other presidents have, but he is prepared more than they would like to let on. But as David said, it's about the future, about going on. And this has a lot to do with the midterm elections back home. I've traveled all week with the president through Brussels, through the United Kingdom, a lot of big images. And he said this would be the easiest. As you said earlier, it's the easiest if he wants it to be the easiest. But he wants there to be him on the foreign stage. You would think that having him here would draw attention to the Russian investigation back home. Administration officials believe that it actually gets him beyond it because it makes him look presidential. I'm not sure that's true if he doesn't confront Vladimir Putin at all.
Presidential becomes a very acute definition. It becomes very subjective, because I have to tell you, this place has a lot of history, Helsinki. We're here for a reason. It may not make that much sense in context today. But past meetings, 1975, the Helsinki Accord, 1990, when George H.W. Bush was here with Gorbachev, 1997 was a very big one with Clinton and Yeltsin for the expansion of NATO. And a lot of those countries that, when expanded from 14 to 29, they live in existential fear of Putin. And to hear the President of the United States not mention the Ukraine and Crimea, I was on Ukrainian soil. I saw what happened when that plane hit the ground and 298 people were dead, and Russian-backed, whatever you want to call them, but they had Russian uniforms on, wouldn't let people collect the dead. That is the image of fear that people are living with and they're worried about in the outcome of this meeting. So we'll see what happens after the meeting and what is said and what the tone is, because there are literally people watching and listening all around the world, and I'll have you good people to help me understand it when we learn. We have been told that the media has been told to assemble a few minutes from now. We don't know what that means, but we will take you through it. Am I going back to New York, or are we going to break? What do you want? Break it is. Stay with CNN. There is so much more to cover. We'll take you through it as it happens.
President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin have now been meeting for about an hour behind closed doors. So what's happening in there? Is it possible that President Trump would confront Vladimir Putin about the difficult issues facing the world? Joining us now with his expectations is former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations and former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson. Good morning, Governor.
Good morning, Allison.
Help us manage our expectations. What is possible to come out of this meeting? What are you looking to see?
Well, what I wanted more than anything as an American, not just as a as a Democrat or Republican, is the president saying to Putin, what you did in meddling in our election is unacceptable. I want an assurance that it'll never happen again. And then thirdly, I would ask for the extradition of those 12 indicted intelligence officers. Now, that's probably going to be very difficult under Russian law. But my worry, Allison, having been in these summits before, the prelude to the summits, the opening statements, kind of tell you what is going to be discussed. The fact that the election meddling was not discussed, as somebody that's been in elections before, the massive interference in our electoral process, WikiLeaks hacking the Democratic National Committee, obviously against Hillary Clinton, is so blatant that it requires a response. The fact that also with Syria, Russia helping Iran against all kinds of human rights interests in Syria, helping Assad, certifying to Russia that it's okay what happened with Crimea and Ukraine.
Yeah.
The fact that that wasn't mentioned at the outset is very troubling. Maybe he's going to mention it, you know, in passing to cover himself, but I'm very concerned about the results of this summit.
Governor, what you have just described is so far afield from what was just said in the tone of the photo op. So there were a few words just exchanged in front of reporters. As you know, what's going on behind closed doors, we may never have an accurate accounting of right now. But the photo op beforehand, let me play for you what President Trump felt compelled to say to Vladimir Putin.
I think we have great opportunities together as two countries that, frankly, we have not been getting along very well for the last number of years. I've been here not too long, but it's getting close to 2 years. But I think we will end up having an extraordinary relationship. I hope so. I've been saying, and I'm sure you've heard over the years, and as I campaigned, that getting along with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing.
I mean, so it sounds like what President Trump's end game is and what he's going in really hoping for is to have an extraordinary relationship with Russia. Your thoughts?
Well, there's no question the U.S.-Russia relationship is very important. There are a lot of issues that we need each other. And the fact that it's not going well is also a reality. The concern I have is that this summit is going to sweep the problems we've had where we have to stand up for Ukraine, for human rights in Syria, where we have to stand up for our democracy and electoral process, and instead we're going to focus, well, all right, an arms control agreement, resuming the START talks, the INF talks, that's good. But that's the only deliverable, and Putin wins if none of these issues, contentious issues, especially the electoral involvement, are not raised. He comes out the big winner, because the absence of friction makes Putin win if we basically certify, okay, let's put all that aside, all that important stuff aside, and then focus on issues in the future. Well, all right, an arms control agreement, well, that's good for humanity, but we cannot possibly excuse what has happened in his behavior and his potential involvement in the next election. His own national security advisor mentioned it. The head of our intelligence services, Dan Coates, has mentioned it.
Yeah.
Cyber threats. You know, this is not good.
Governor, you have been involved in high-stakes diplomacy. Do you find it strange that President Trump doesn't want his top aides in the room with him, that we don't, as far as we know, there's no State Department officials, that at best there might be an interpreter on his side to witness and somehow try to recollect what goes on between these two men?
This seems to be a pattern of the president, which is very troubling. I've never been in a summit situation like that or observed it before. Secretary Pompeo, the Secretary of State, should be at that meeting. He is the chief diplomat. He's done a good job, I believe, Pompeo, with North Korea. So my worry is that even John Bolton, who is tough appropriately on Russia, won't be there. So you don't know what's going to be discussed. You don't know what's going to be recorded. And so you're left alone in this luncheon that they're going to have, or this meeting of the principals. Maybe it's already been decided, and that's just a meeting that is not going to have much substance, where maybe you cover the things, well, what about Syria? What about, but instead of saying, what about Syria, you want to say to Putin, look, we've got to find a political solution that excludes Assad. On Crimea, you can't do that again. You've got to find ways to stop the carnage in Ukraine and Crimea. And then on our electoral process, you have got to say to him, you can't ever do that again. You give me an assurance that that's never going to happen. And by the way, let's get those 12 Russians that have been indicted for massive involvement in our electoral process, which is totally unacceptable. You know, that needs to be said, and you don't know if it's going to be said.
Yeah, I mean, and just to be clear, it doesn't. The president had admitted to CBS this weekend that it had not occurred to him to talk about the extradition. He hadn't thought of that, but he said that he will bring it up. So we will see what he says when he comes out. Bill Richardson, thank you very much for your expertise. Great to have you here. John.
All right, it's almost halftime at the Trump-Putin summit in Helsinki. The two are wrapping up very shortly, believe their one-on-one meeting. We've been told there'll be some kind of photo op in between, and then they'll go behind closed doors with their staffs for more meetings. What will they say? We could find out in just a few minutes. CNN's special live coverage continues right after this.
us get along. We are the two great nuclear powers. We have 90% of the nuclear, and that's not a good thing. It's a bad thing. And I think we hopefully can do something about that, because it's not a positive force, it's a negative force.
All right, that was President Trump right before going into his private meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Here we are in Helsinki, Finland. We're expecting to hear from both leaders soon about what they discussed and what happened.